Hiring is on already.
Yes. So good morning, all of you. Today we are starting with a new unit, that is immunology or immune system, and this is from cytogenetic specialization. Okay, paper 4, unit 3. Okay, so today I'll just introduce the topic to you all. Okay, we'll have a general overview about the topic, and then we'll go further. Okay, so today we'll be discussing a bit of history, then the cells of the immune system, okay, and where the actual action occurs, okay, at which place, which locations, and what are the strategies our body or the host body like takes to perform the defense action, okay, or immunologic strategies of the host. Okay, so if I ask you a question, that is, what is immune system? So what you can tell me? What is immune system? Yes, somebody reply.
Ma'am, it is inbuilt defense system of our body.
Okay. Anybody else? One more answer we can take. Yes. I'm trying going to the next one. Okay.
Ma'am, it's the ability to
The
resist infections and other foreign viruses or bacteria.
yes. So okay, fine. So though that is you're talking about the ability to resist or fight. Tawfiq told me it is a innate system of the human body to which do the defense against the foreign bacteria or germs or whatever. So most of the time, what happens is when we ask this question of what is immune system, what we actually get or find easy to answer is that it is a system which does this thing. It is a system which does this thing. Okay. So you are saying it does the defense. It is resisting something. So that is the action of the immune system. What is actually the immune system is this. Okay. So let us just read this definition. First of all, it is a vast communication network. Okay, it is a communicating network of cells and chemical signals. Okay, so there are many different type of cells which come together to form this entire system, and there are specialized chemical signals. Okay, now where this entire network is present, that it is distributed in blood and tissues throughout the human body, okay, which regulates normal growth and development of the organism, and it is doing these two things while it is protecting against any diseases, okay, against any foreign bodies, germs, bacteria, virus, anything. Okay, so this is about the immune system. So basically the system is made by the cells and the chemical signals, which is present all over the human body, and its function is in not just protecting and defense, but also regulating and seeing to it that the rest of the things, the peripheral things, are kept in check so that normal growth and development of the organism can happen. Okay, so we can just simplify it little bit and then give the definition for immunity. So this is very much similar to what Nidhi said, that it is a condition in humans that permits innate and acquired resistance to the disease. Okay, now what do you mean by this? Immunity is a condition in humans. Okay, it is a condition human, like you can say immunity is the power that human have. Okay, and this condition permits them to resist different diseases, and it can resist the different diseases by two ways. Okay, first is the innate and second is the acquired. Innate means, or we can say hardwire, in the sense it means that it is present from like the day you are born or before, even before born. Okay, so it is present by birth, and acquired resistance is basically as and when the in due course of your entire lifetime, people start acquiring this different type of defense mechanism or resistance to particular diseases. Now, this is said to be acquired resistance. Okay. Now, acquired resistance can be acquired by a couple of methods. First will be like when you know that newborns baby are they are given this some vaccines. Okay, vaccination process protocols are given. So vaccine or vaccination is first method in which you can acquire the resistance. Second is the natural exposure to some kind of disease. Okay, you know a couple of diseases which people will definitely have like once in their lifetime, but once they have it, then for the second time they are not going to be showing those symptoms or will be like diagnosed with that particular disease. Why so? Because the first exposure gives the body the the antibodies are present in the body, and that type of antibody which is made, its type is stored in the memory cells. Okay, there is something which is called as memory cells in your body which stores that information that if this particular type of antigen enters the body, which was the antibody, the specific antibody which was prepared against that antigen. Okay, so that type, uska memory, that memory cells, they are going to store it, and whenever in future the same antigen tries to attack, your body now already knows what has to be done. So the next exposure will your body's defense system will be much quicker in responding to that same antigen. Okay, so that is said to be the acquired resistance. So it can be basically because of vaccination. Second, just the exposure to some diseases. Okay, and vaccination का जो principle है, it works on the second point which I just discussed. Okay, so that we are doing artificially. Okay, we are doing it on purpose so that you first only vaccinate someone, okay, or that individual with the minor version of or a less harmful version of that particular antigen, and then your body will start the mechanism, defense mechanism against that particular foreign body, and then it will not be like susceptible to that disease. Okay, so this is immunity, uh, innate and acquired resistance to disease. Okay, so now tell me, what is this? Have you seen this? Yes, not in recent times, but you must have seen this in literature. This is the condition of smallpox. Okay, and this is an African child with a rash typical of smallpox. So this smallpox are present on the face, chest, and arms. Okay, so this was some 300 million people had died from this smallpox condition in the 20th century. Okay, so this was a very dreadful disease. Okay, in the past time in the 20th century, and many people used to like get affected because of this disease, and this would just leave the scars on people's like body, and also most of the time this was very fatal. Okay, this had a 30% mortality rate. Okay, and whoever survived this were left with these scars. Okay, so these were like the permanent scars on their body. So in the now we'll be seeing some, like just I mentioned that we'll be seeing some history. So what happened is, see, if these type of people were present at the 20th century and they were suffering from this disease, any individual, any thinking person would think that what can be done, what ways can we just eradicate this thing. Okay, so that led to interest in immunology or immunity in people. Okay, so they didn't knew that they are venturing into immunity or immunology, but that led to the interest that what can be done and why this is happening. They started asking questions. Okay, so as the world population grew, and this was contagious, so this was transferring from one person to another. Okay, and then travel also increased. So there was a gentleman called Edward Jenner. Okay, he called this thing the speckled monster because these were like the speckled specks, pustules and all. This grasped every opportunity to colonize the world. Okay, so basically what he's trying to say is it is a disease which is contagious. That is what he meant by saying this. Okay, it is trying to grasp the opportunity so that it can spread to many people and can cross countries and colonize the entire world. So people struggle to find ways to battle the smallpox. Okay, it was also potentially one of the most devastating. So this is also mentioned somewhere in the history that this was also conceived as a biological weapons. Okay, because you know those were the times when there were like a lot of wars used to take place. Okay, second is example is this Black Death. Okay, so this was also called to be a plague. This was a bubonic plague. Okay, in the 17th century, but this was commonly called in people, like local people used to call this to be a Black Death. Why so? Because these were the symptoms. Okay, fever and swelling of lymph glands. This was the symptoms, but they didn't know that those are the lymph glands which are getting swelled. But what the external symptoms were these. Okay, first there were red spots on the skin, and then those red spots turn black. Okay, and it was also fatal. So this was one of the worst plagues in the history of Europe. Okay, and somewhere 5 years down the line, 25 to 50 million people have been like dead because of this, and this came to be known as the Black Death. Okay, at the late 17th century. So, like this, these were the two examples. Like this, there have been many plagues, okay? In the past, there have been many such plagues. For example, the plague of Athens, which was later on confirmed that it was because of smallpox. Then the plague of Justinian, which was a bubonic plague, okay? So, even in the 1300s and 1500s, okay? Now, in very recent years, just before like 100 years before, the plague because of like tuberculosis and influenza. Even influenza, just in 1918, it killed 25 to 50 million people worldwide. Okay, so we know that influenza even exists today, and there are day by day new virulent varieties or strains which come up, and there is a like there's still a fear of these varieties because people, these are mostly contagious, mostly respiratory in source. Okay, the disease source, and this can kill lot of people. And in today's times, the major concern is because of the density of the people, the population which exists. Okay, because that time at least there were less population, but now the population has increased, and that has led to a lot of population density. So in a very like limited space, more number of people are cramped up together, more in close contact with each other, and that has led to more like more and more kind of this pandemics and contagious diseases. Okay, so then people started all these years when this plagues and pandemics and different type of diseases which were like conquering the world, people started thinking in different places, different countries, that what is this happening? Why? What is the reason for all this? Okay, so very early, the earlier beliefs were like there is something in the air. Okay, some evil force which is just passing on to people, and they are just inhaling it, and all these vicious things are happening to them. Or some people talked about this humorism. Now this humorism, if you see this diagram or the symbol, it is very much related to a concept or a philosophy which even our Indian medical system talks about, that is of the 5 elements, okay, which are present in your body. Like your body is made up of those 5 elements, which makes it in like alignment with the nature. Okay, so this people started talking about that this is like the air, water, earth, fire, and even like in our system we even consider the sky. So if these things are not in a balanced state in your body, if you have some more of something and less of something, this is going to cause some havoc in your body. But and they thought that this is the reason for all these diseases, but later on it was like ruled out, because this is not the reason for this type of immunity diseases, but this can be one of the factor which has led to the collapsing of the immune system, which was not known to human, but it definitely existed, okay, in human body. So this was that. Then second was the spontaneous generation theory. Many people thought that something is just like rupturing out of a place, and then it is generation from inside to outside and causing all this disease. Okay, you must be knowing the spontaneous generation theory. This is an outmoded theory, and then later on it was outmodeled by Edward Jenner, I guess. Uh, what this theory said, that the reproduction of some species or something occurs from non-living objects. Okay, this was ruled out later on. So these were the earlier beliefs. Then came a substantial observation. Okay, so what happened in this Thucydides? Okay, he was a historian. He was a military historian, and he was at the time present in Greece, and at the time of the war which was fought between the Athenians and the Spartans. Okay, so he was diagnosed with this disease, that is like smallpox, but he survived. He didn't die, and he survived. And then later on he just observed that people who survived the plague of Athens were able to care for the sick without becoming ill again. Okay, now in today's time this is a very common observation. We people even know about this, that there are some diseases which, like, first we are infected with, if we are cured, then in the next exposure will not give you that kind of disease. But this was a very new and very important observation that he did at that time. Okay, so this was starting of, okay, a great observation which was first made in the field of immunology. Then similar observations were seen in other places as well. That is, in 10th century, the China, okay, Chinese people, they started practicing this thing which is called to be like, they started puncturing the other people, the healthy people, with this powdered scabs of smallpox. Okay, so basically smallpox, when the disease has like it is at the last stage, and when the poxes are drying out, they become a white powdery like structure. So they used to take these powders and scab the powdered scabs, and they used to puncture the people with this, considering that this prevents the people from getting the disease. Okay, so this was the same thing. They knew that somebody who is infected first, and if it's cured, then those people will again will not be affected, and they can be like immune to this disease. So they started doing this. Okay, but obviously the techniques and how they did it matter. So there were many people who died, but there were also few which were like becoming immune. Okay, same, there were some Islamic physiologists, then there were some Italian physiologists. Okay, and they were talking about, they were finding out that these are some contagious entities. This is some kind of communication from one person to another. Okay, so in this way, the progress was taking place. Now comes a very important, a step further. Okay, so this is who is this lady? This is Lady Mary Wortley Montagu. Okay, it's mentioned even in your QB book. You can refer and read more about her. So this lady was a wife of a British ambassador. Okay, and she and her brother both had smallpox. Her brother, I guess, died, and she was also diagnosed with it, but she survived. And she didn't want her children. She had two children, and she didn't want them to get affected with this. Okay, so she observed this traders who were like moving on, that this positive effect, this variolation. Now, what is this variolation? This is that poking of those powdered swabs. Okay, why is it called variolation? Because smallpox was variola major. Okay, so they were poking them in people, so this was called to be variolation. So she observed this positive effect, and then she thought that if this is showing a good positive effect, then she want this for her children. She don't want her children to be diagnosed with smallpox. So this lady became responsible, where the English started adopting this variolation technique. Okay, she talked to the King of the London, and then this process of variolation started there. Okay, that poking people, the healthy people, with this thing. Okay, then the same thing was further taken forward by Edward Jenner. Okay, now this Edward Jenner, he became the person who coined this term vaccinate. Okay, So what he did, he used the cowpox, okay, which was harming the cows. He used that organism, cowpox, as a vaccine against the human smallpox. Okay, why so? Because the cowpox was not killing the human, and it was also like triggering the immune system to form the further defense mechanism. So, and how did this term came? Vaccinate, because vacca is a root name for like cow. Okay, cow is the root name for this vacca. So from there, because he used the cowpox, he named it. He named that process to be vaccination or vaccinating someone. Okay, so that was done by Edward Jenner, and then also in somewhere in 18 late mid 1800s, this process, which is very important, that is of hand washing. Okay, this was led in procedures. Okay, because then the doctors or the physicians which were present at that time, they understood that it is not a right condition to move from one operation to another, so they started this practice, okay, of hand washing. And they saw the results that the infection rate has definitely like lower, okay, come down. So these were some things. Then came the rapid advancement. Okay, so now all these things were happening on the external observations. Okay, there was nothing they were looking at internally. But in the later time, more progress happened, because Louis Pasteur, he ruled out this theory, okay, of spontaneous generation, and he came up with this concept of germs. Okay, he understood that these diseases are caused by different germs, not specific what they are, which bacteria, which virus, but they just collectively termed it to be the germs are causing these diseases. Okay, then this Robert Koch, he laid out some like some procedures to find out which microbe is responsible for which disease. So this were the time when people were saying, the scientists were saying that yes, I saw a bacteria, I saw a virus. Okay, and even they went on to further find out that these can also be transmitted by a third party. Okay, so which we now call them to be vectors, which are taking these germs and like loading it in some other host. And in the late 19th and 20th century, there were much more development of vaccines. Okay, so now the new understandings were because of the concept of germs, because they have found out that this is occurring because of germs. And also there was one more very important thing, that is improving the technology to look at very small things. Okay, now what is this technology? To look at very, very small things is done by microscopes. Okay, so there was much more improvement in this technology of microscopy. And then this different practical victories and successful experiments were taking place. Then finally, the scientist had the tool to look inwards and find out the reasons for this, how these diseases are caused and what can be done to stop them or cure them. Okay, so they started asking some basic question. That is, the first basic question was, what can be the mechanism of resistance to infection and disease? Okay, so they started now to look inward and started looking at very small things. So they started with the blood. When they saw the blood, what the things they saw are the blood cells. Okay, so this is a slide of blood cells. Okay, we'll be talking more about its property of being hematopoiesis in later lectures. But this is a particular picture which I thought would be apt, because see here we all know that it starts from stem cell, and this stem cell is basically a hello. Yes, are you guys with me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, fine. So this is the stem cell, the first cell. Then this stem cell has a property of being pluripotent. Pluripotent means it can, pluripotent, not totipotent. So it can be become any of this cell. Okay, any of this cell it can become as it goes on further in its life process and attain specification. Okay, so that we will see more on in cell biology. Or cancer biology, but the stem cells can become, it has not decided its stage. Okay, once it decides, it can either become myeloid or it can go for lymphoid cells. Okay, lymphoid progenitor. These myeloid progenitors will can form megakaryote, erythrocyte, granulocytes, okay, and many this type of cells. So all this, you can see this different structure and the shape and color and formation of the cells give you even how individual cell looks. See, this dendritic cell is very different from the RBC, okay. So that is the reason I chose this photograph to give you a brief view. Then, if in this all the cells, they later on found out that except for the erythrocytes, which is RBC, red blood cells, the rest of all come under WBCs, okay, white blood cells, and WBCs forms the defense mechanism of your body, okay. So later on, with more sophisticated microscopes, this is a scanning electron microscope photograph. They saw the cells in those kind of microscopy. Okay, so these are the red blood cells. They saw this structure. Okay, how it is. There's a disc-like thing and some depression in the center. Okay, a pit-like thing in the center. And then these were this furry ball things were the WBCs. Okay. So they started differentiating between the cells and started studying their properties. Next, now that you know that this RBCs, WBCs, different cells, what is important to know is where the immune system is present. Okay, we have talked so much about the immune system. Where is it present? Can anybody tell me? Where the immune system is present? Yes? Can be a general answer. Hello, am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Okay, somebody has replied in chat. Just a second. WBCs, bone marrow. Okay, fine. Okay, these people are answering. Abhijit has said bone marrow, WBC. Okay. So WBCs are the cells. Bone marrow is the place where the cells are formed. Okay, bone marrow is the place. So do you think only there the lymphatic or this defense mechanism is present? There, but also at other places. Basically, you can say everywhere. Okay, but we will see another system which is in very close functioning with the lymphatic system. With the immune system, and that is the lymphatic system. Most of the lymphatic system, which like the organelles, which is forming the lymphatic systems, they function in the immune system. They contribute to the immune system. Okay, so first thing that is we will look into is bone marrow. Now, this bone marrow is present in the bone's internal core. Okay, if you have studied osteoporosis or something like these type of bone diseases, if you have studied the internal structure, you will know bone marrow is present right in the center, in the core of the bone. This is the place where blood cells are formed. Okay, then we come to this organ, that is thymus. Thymus is a organ which is huge when in early ages of life. Okay, it is used in children, but as and when people grow, this shrinks. Okay, so thymus will be very important in contributing to the immune system, because this is the place where the T lymphocytes, their maturation takes place. Okay, so the T lymphocytes are working, they have a very special role in immune system. So that is the reason thymus is contributing for T lymphocyte maturation, like which T lymphocyte can now go and fight, which T lymphocyte has not properly matured, so just kill that T lymphocytes. Okay, all those viewing of this T lymphocytes and their decision is made here. If you talk about this lymph nodes, okay, the lymph nodes are present everywhere, or more prominently wherever there is an opening to your body. Okay, so near the mouth, nasal openings. Okay, there are tonsils and adenoids, and here in the neck region, or more towards your this clavicles, there are few lymph nodes. Okay, the lymph nodes are present in the axillary place, okay, axillary in the arm, okay, armpits. Then there are this special types, they are called to be Peyer's patches. Anybody knows what are these Peyer's patches? They are these white patches, okay, can be called to be lymph nodes only, present in the small intestine, okay, along with bacterial competition, they help in the defense mechanism. Then you have this inguinal lymph nodes, which is more towards your vaginal or rectal openings, okay, and you have this spleen. Now, this spleen is also contributing, or the effects are seen if anything happens to the immune system, or for example, people suffering from lymphoma, okay, a cancer of this lymphoma. So there is that uncontrolled growth of these cells, okay, and the effect can be seen in the spleen, because the spleen will start getting larger in size, and it can reach to a very fatal stage where the spleen can even rupture and can cause the spread of all the toxins in the body, okay. And this is a diagram of a lymph node, okay. So lymph node is a place, see, this is an immune scanning response is mounted, okay. So this is a scanning place, and lymph is carrying whatever the foreign bodies it will carry here, and this will be drained out, okay. They will be captured here, all the foreign, and then the lymph will be purified kind of, and the purified lymph will be going out of that lymph node, okay. So this is the reason why lymph nodes are present all over your body, throughout your body, okay. So this lymphatic system contributes a lot for the immune system, okay. And immune system or immune defense is present all over your body, okay, because the cells. So now we will just consider a particular germ or bacteria, okay, and now we will consider where the germ is actually entering and where it is trying to reach in the body, okay. Because for example, like, why did your breakfast did not kill you, or maybe anything, okay, because only in this pandemics have we have become such aware of, like, always washing your hands or sanitizing everything, but we have been living for many years not considering all these things, but those have not really killed us, okay. So how the body does these strategies, okay, immunological strategies, and help us not getting killed by all these different bacteria and viruses which unknowingly enter our system, and we are not even aware of this, okay. So if we consider now, if consider each one of you, consider your own self to be a germ, okay, and then we are trying to enter, okay. So what can be the route of exposure to the infectious organs? So how the infection organs are trying to enter the system? It can be through skin, okay, so external surfaces as such. So for example, if there is any, if in each one of us, okay, I am a fungus and I am present at the external part of the foot, okay, and if I enter, breach through that skin, I might cause athlete's foot, okay. But that is always not the case. People live their entire lifetime without getting any skin infection or allergies, okay. So how your body is actually fighting? Then the next can be mucous membranes, okay. Mucous membranes are basically mucus producing membrane cells, okay, and they are present almost at near to every opening, every part, okay. For example, we will see in further slides. So first, if we talk about skin, just a topical, like, cut on the skin or some breaching of the skin, and there is an entry of some germ, okay, into your skin. If it enters to the lower levels, you see here there are blood and lymph vessels, okay. So the lymph vessel is present here, and those microbes or germs will be, like, taken in this lymphatic vessels, okay, and it will be given to the lymph nodes, and there all the draining and everything is going to take place, okay. So this is by skin breaching, or by if the germ gets an opportunity chance to enter through the skin, okay. And the further process will also take place. It will give to the lymph node, and then it will be seen what has to be done of that germ. Next, if the germ is lucky enough to get a direct opening, okay, through the mouth, okay, direct entry into the body, into the system. So what will happen? It will face the mucous membranes, okay. So mucous membranes, where they are present, first of all, in your buccal cavity, in your, on your tongue, in your this neck, esophagus, like wherever the food pipe is going, basically entire lining of your alimentary canal, the passageway, your trachea to the lungs, and even to your stomach. The internal stomach lining also has this mucous membrane, And this mucous membranes, what it does, it produces or it secretes mucus. Okay, so if you remove this thing, this is the upper view of the cells. If you the cells will be, if you see it from the side view, this will be like this, but these are the cells of alveoli. Okay, so we are talking about the mucous membrane here of the lungs. So basically, what are these mucous membranes? These are the cells which secrete mucus, and apparently in a day we secrete a liter of mucus. Okay, so now this small germ is trying to, and this mucus is very sticky. Okay, it's very sticky, thick. So it is trying to pass through this mucus and go ahead in its path. Okay, and if it even moves further, there are these cilia. Okay, now I hope you know these cilia. They are hair-like structures and present at top of these goblet cells, mucus cells. Now the cilia, what they do, your entire lifetime, you know, the cilia are also present in your nasal cavity, in your ear opening. Okay, so these cells, if there is any particulate matter or any germ and all present on this surface of this, the cilia throughout your life, very slowly and very calmly, very silently, they are just moving in one direction. And if this is the exit point, they will be just moving and telling the particle to, like, this is the exit, move to the exit, move to the exit. Okay, and throwing it out. Okay, so these are the first line of defenses. Okay, the first defense line mechanism, the germ. Now we are in the position of germ. Okay, so the germ is facing, it has passed the skin, it has like dodged the all the lymphatic system, it has, or there is an opening and it has entered through an opening, but it is now passing through the mucus. For example, if it passed through all those things and then enters through this esophagus, even in the stomach, what it is going to face, what the germ is going to face here, the hydrochloric acid, HCl. Okay, so if the HCl acts on it, the germ is going to be get killed. But even if it survives, the germ is so sturdy that even it survives that HCl, then it will move into the intestines. Okay, see here in the this slide or this diagram, you can see the small part of the internal lining of the alimentary canal or your stomach. Here also you can see this mucosa. Okay, mucosa layer. So here as well the mucus is secreted. Okay, then it will enter the this system of like alimentary canals ka aage ka system, that is intestine. In intestine there are lot many bacteria. Okay, so this particular germ is going to face now the bacterial competition. Okay, bacterial competition. Now we people know that there are good bacteria for good measures present in the human body, and they are present in the mostly in the rectal and the anal part. So they are not going to allow this foreign germ to come and reside in the body. Okay, so these are the line of defenses the germ is facing. Okay, so first of all, it is passing through the mucus. Then there can be mechanical washings. For example, chewing take place. Okay, churning of food take place. All those things. Even if it survives that, there can be mechanical expulsion. Mechanical expulsions are basically coughing. You can cough out with the mucus, that bacteria outside, or you can cough, sneeze it out. Okay, even if it survives those, it can reach a place of stomach where it is facing the HCl, hydrochloric acid, other enzymes, and further bacterial competition. Okay, this is basically near of the maybe your buccal cavity. Again, here the basal cells. This is the cilia, and these are the submucosal glands, and from here the mucus is secreted. Okay, so now it gets more critical, that is if it has survived, the germ has survived all of this. Okay, so further it will be facing the defensins or other molecules like this small molecules, enzyme, catalytic or just toll like receptors. Okay, so these defensins, for example, if we take these defensins, these are secreted by WBCs, or WBCs have this type of defensins, and these go and bind with those germs. Okay, and basically once it binds, it is going to poke a hole into that germ and like suck out, drain out all its nutritional material. Okay, everything that is keeping that organism alive, and it is going to suck it out. Once all its nutritional element is sucked out, that organism is just going to be like just a remnant, okay, and that will be like taken into the cleaning system of this defense system, and then in that manner it can be cured, okay. But the germ is even sturdy. It is passing even through all this, okay. It is dodging all these molecules, enzymes, and going further. Then it is going to face phagocytes, okay. Now these are the cells which are trying to eat up, okay, eat up that germ. It has passed through all this, it has cleared all these milestones for itself, the germ, but now it is facing the phagocytes. So the phagocytes are the cells that consume their enemies, okay, and they do this by the process of phagocytosis. So there are some professional phagocytes, okay. So these are a few WBCs, that is the neutrophils, macrophages, and dendritic cells. How they function? Their mechanism is they recognize that this is a foreign body, not a self body, not a entity which belongs to this body. So they will recognize, they will ingest that, okay. They will like engulf those things, खा जाएंगे उसको, and then they will destroy that thing inside their body, okay. So this is the mechanism neutrophils, macrophages, and dendritic cells use. And when they are trying to destroy them inside, they are going to secrete this nitrogen oxides or any toxic, this lactoferrins as such, okay. This so this is one example of phagocytosis by macrophage, okay. Now see, these macrophages, they are forming the pseudopods. So basically macrophages, we see that those were the white color round structures with some hairs. But whenever there is some organism in vicinity, okay, it is going to extend its pseudopods, like basically the false, their limbs, okay, false limbs, and going to catch hold of those microbes and bring it closer, ingest it, and then destroy it, okay. Then neutrophils. This is a neutrophil which is engulfing this anthrax, okay, Bacillus anthracis. So in this manner, it is going to engulf it and then destroy it inside, okay. So at this point, I would like to show you this neutrophil chasing bacteria video. Let's just see if this opens. Okay, we still have 15 minutes. Are you clear with all these things, the slides I am explaining?
Yes.
Okay. The screen is visible, right? Okay, can you see? So this is neutrophil and
Ma'am,
these,
the video
yes,
is not visible.
not visible.
No, ma'am.
Okay, wait. Wait. Now it's visible.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So see, this is a neutrophil, okay, and this small one is the bacteria, okay, and see how the neutrophil is moving behind this bacteria, okay, it is following it, chasing, and then finally engulfing it. Clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Okay. So in this is the way the mechanism takes place. Okay. So I stop sharing this and then share my. Okay. So you can watch this video again on your own, okay, on YouTube. This is neutrophil chasing the bacteria. Okay. So in this manner, it moves behind the bacteria and then reaches it, overcomes it, like and like take it inside and digest it. Okay. Okay, so this was a summary. The germ tried to sneak in inside through the skin or through direct opening. First, it was there was mechanical barriers, that is, or physical barriers, that is your skin. Skin itself is a barrier. Okay. Then chemical barriers, antimicrobial peptides, like for example some enzymes, proteins. Okay, chemical barriers. Then microbiological competition, the good bacteria within your system which is trying to fight that thing. Phagocytosis, okay, or the neutrophil attacking. And there is this innate immunity also has this complement system, but we will talk about this system. This is a much sophisticated system. We will talk in further coming lectures. But as of now, what is this complement system? This is a plasma protein that tries to tag bacteria. Okay, so basically it is just going to like tag those bacteria. It is not going to kill those bacteria on its own. It is going to tag those bacteria so that the other phagocytes and antibodies or the different T cells and all those things, they can, this bacteria can come in their view, okay? And they know that this is present and they can go at that site and attack and kill that organism. Okay, so now the next question is how this neutrophil comes to know where that bacteria is. Okay, how it is moving. In this video you saw na, that neutrophil is running behind that organism or bacteria. The thing is they do not have this eyes, okay, to like visually see this, but they do have something which is said to be a smell receptor, okay, or for example a chemotaxis reaction can take place there. This is a neutrophil, and this neutrophil is trying to move in the direction where there is a lot of chemokine. Now this chemokine is secreted by this, like this will be present wherever there are bacteria. Okay, this is a kind of a smell which is usually not present, but bacteria, whenever bacteria will be present, there will be a concentration of chemokine, and this neutrophil is actually moving in the direction of this chemokine concentration. And where there is highest concentration, it is going to just reach there and engulf this entire thing. Okay, whatever is causing this chemokine concentration. So this is said to be neutrophil chemotaxis. This also in the recent 10 or 20 years, the research has been going on in this. There are other chemicals as well, but chemokine is a specific one which I just talked about. So there is one more beautiful video. Okay, and this is an experimental video, okay? So just a second, I will share. Ideally, that screen should get shared along with this. I'll play this again. Can you see?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. This is a macrophage one. Okay. This I just saw today itself, so you can see how the macrophage is uh, protruding and forming its pseudopores. Okay, see this place. It has taken up the cell and now that foreign thing is inside the macrophage. Okay, that's about it. So did you see this thing, that chemokine or any this chemicals which attracts this neutrophil? So that person, that student was trying to send that through the micropipette, and wherever they were moving the micropipette, the neutrophil was trying to move in that direction. Okay, so from this it is clear that the neutrophil is actually following the concentration of the chemokine which are secreted by this bacteria, and in that process is basically like engulfs this bacteria. Okay, so here we came to this thing that this is the end, like at least for a general way, that it is passing through all these barriers, and at the end those germs are basically getting killed or engulfed and killed by phagocytosis, neutrophils, and all those things. Okay, so this is the general mechanism, and once it is like taken up inside the macrophages or the neutrophils and it is killed, then the debris or neutrophils are one of those cells which have very less lifespan. Okay, so they themselves also are getting killed. Okay, and that is done through a very programmed process that is said to be a programmed cell death or apoptosis. Okay, it is a self-killing. So we will study all those things in actual our further topics. Okay, so this was general overview, and actually we have completed the entire path. Okay, the entry and how what all barriers it is passing, and then ultimately what is happening. But there are very important specific points, so that those we will be covering in our syllabus. Okay, so our syllabus consists of phylogeny of the immune system, innate immunity, adaptive immunity. So today whatever we have talked about, at least we have touched on some topics of innate immunity, but we have not talked about anything about adaptive immunity. Okay, so we will consider like talk about this in further coming lectures. Then we will study antigens and their nature and biology, major histocompatibility complex, which is a very interesting unit, cells of this immune system, regulation of the responses, production of antibodies by plant cells and organs. Okay, so can you tell me what is the system in plants which goes parallelly with the immune system of any organs? Okay, organisms, humans. Plants में कौन सा system होगा which is playing the immunology function? Will also be doing this health and diseases and immunodeficiency and AIDS. Okay? So this will be doing further. Plants में कौन सा होगा? Which mechanisms? Somebody tell me.
मैम वो कैलोस प्लग का जो होता है कि कभी किधर अगर ये होता है, वुंड होता है, तो कैलोस जाके फॉर्म करता है स्लीव ट्यूब्स में.
Yes, okay, fine. So that will be like, we will be correlating that. Okay, so basically just the plant's defense mechanism. Okay, the defense mechanism is first, है ना, the first line of defense mechanism is by the morphological structures, right? जो thorns होते हैं, right? The hairs which are present sometimes to keep the plant away from the herbivores. Okay, so all those things. Then they have their chemical defense system. So we will see a few bits here and there in this topic. Okay, and plant cells and organs. So that was the general overview of this topic. Okay, and then we will continue. We will start actually with each and every small points in the next lecture. Okay, so I guess it's 11 o'clock.
Students, last time we finished with the RNA processing part, right, from this unit. So if you remember the central dogma, I told you that in the entire paper, we will be doing with the concept of central dogma. Okay, in that we have finished with replication, transcription, and RNA processing, because ribosomal RNA and transfer RNA we have done in the last unit, and the mRNA processing, the three major steps, capping, polyadenylation, and splicing, we have done in this unit so far. Now, the rest of the unit is not directly deals with central dogma. I've told you when I explained you the outline that the almost half of the unit is divergent. It is you can say that it is sidelined from the central dogma, because you know that after processing, the next step of central dogma is translation, and that is our fourth unit. Okay, so rest of this RNA processing unit is a bit different. Okay, so let's start with that part, which is not directly linked to central dogma. Okay, we are not doing any process of central dogma as such. So now the concept of central dogma is clear with you, I suppose. Okay, so in that central dogma says that DNA has the information to code for proteins. In that first step of protein synthesis, or say, let's say gene expression, is transcription, and the next step is translation. So in the first step, DNA gets converted into RNA, and in the next step, translation, RNA will be translated into protein. So that means to synthesize a protein, the information is with DNA. So DNA has the information to synthesize proteins, and the first step, that is transcription of protein synthesis, requires proteins. That is all the transcription factors. If you remember, we have discussed this this part when Taufik asked that question back. Remember that if DNA has the information to synthesize proteins, and transcription itself requires protein. So how is that possible? So the transcription factors and the RNA polymerase, which are proteins, so how those are made. Okay, so that time I explained you that if we go imaginally back, then this started with a zygote. Okay, the first cell of life of organism. So this zygote must have the initial transcription factors and RNA polymerase, and of course ribosomes, so that transcription and translation can take place and initial proteins can be synthesized. Right? That time I also explained you that this RNA polymerase must have evolved during the evolution. Okay, long back, this RNA polymerase must have evolved, and then it has been passed from next generation to previous generation to next. So we have these proteins initially, we got them from our parents, they got from their parents. So likewise, from generation to generation, it has been passed to the next generation. So that means these must have early proteins to be evolved. So this discussion goes, so when the central dogma, the research has been carried out, this was the question, the interesting question, that how this is possible, that DNA requires protein and protein has a information with DNA. So when any question arises in science, then the hypothesis is proposed, and then experiments were done to test that hypothesis, to give the evidence to support that hypothesis. Okay, so to answer this question, different hypotheses were proposed. So here we will discuss RNA world hypothesis, that when the research has been carried out, different evidences, scientists got the different evidences that suggest that the today's DNA protein world, before this world, RNA world must have existed. So RNA world precedes the modern DNA protein world. Okay, so let's look at this particular slide, shows the central dogma. Okay, from DNA to RNA to protein. So in this central dogma, so far we have studied it in terms of DNA has information for proteins. So DNA codes for proteins, and that is via RNA. Okay, you look at the central dogma like this. from DNA to protein via RNA. But the RNA world hypothesis says that RNA world must have preceded the DNA protein world. So that means this RNA somewhere back in time can perform the function of both DNA as well as proteins. And one evidence we surely have that RNA can be a genetic material. Okay, we know that retroviruses, they have RNA as a genetic material. So RNA in fact has the ability to act as a genetic material. Then RNA can also act as protein. The answer is yes. And that is our first topic, that is ribozymes. Okay, so the discovery of ribozymes gave a supporting evidence to RNA world hypothesis that RNA can act as a protein. Okay, so this hypothesis led to the solution to the classic problem: what came first, DNA or a protein? It is that chicken egg problem. What came first, chicken or egg? So here the same problem was there. What came first, DNA or protein? So this RNA world hypothesis gave some satisfactory explanation to some extent at least, that RNA must be somewhere the center of life. Okay, because of its property to function both as genetic material as well as a catalyst. Okay, now first let's see the relation between RNA and DNA. The hypothesis also says that means that DNA and protein evolved later. Again, there are controversies to this, but if the DNA and RNA relation is concerned, this can be explained satisfactorily, because you know that this ribose sugar got reduced to deoxyribose. You have done nucleotide biosynthesis, right? So in that, you know now that RNA nucleotides are synthesized, and then the enzyme ribonucleotide reductase reduces RNA nucleotides and deoxyribonucleotides are produced. Okay, now this part you know. That means RNA must be the precursor of DNA. RNA, the ribose sugar got reduced and DNA is formed, that is deoxyribonucleotides are formed, because the rest of the structure of a nucleotide is same in DNA and RNA, only that sugar is different, and the difference between the sugar is that 2' OH got reduced to H. Loss of oxygen is reduction, right? So this is one evidence, and this reduction of ribose to deoxyribose made DNA a suitable candidate for the genetic material. Why? Because that reduction made DNA more stable than RNA. Because OH is a nucleophile. So OH group is a reactive group. So that, because see, the rest of the OH, they are in the bond. Okay, they are bonded. The 3 OH is bonded with the phosphodiester bond. Other are also bonded. So what remains free is that 2' OH. The 2' OH gives RNA its reactivity. And when that OH got reduced to H and converted into deoxyribose sugar, that reactivity is lost. So less reactivity means more stability. And the genetic material logically should be more stable, because it has to store the information from generation to generation. So it has to be stable. So that made DNA more suitable as a genetic material than RNA. Okay, this is one explanation. And second difference between RNA and DNA that you know is thymine and uracil. Thymine is in DNA and uracil is in RNA. So that the explanation for this goes like, cytosine can spontaneously deaminate into a uracil. Okay, there is this cytosine nitrogen base is prone to spontaneous deamination. That means it can lose its amine group, NH2 group, spontaneously, and then it will get converted into uracil. So if this happens spontaneously, C2U, okay, C2U mutation can happen. If it happens spontaneously, then what will happen? The genetic information will change. That's why this uracil has been replaced by thymine in DNA, because thymine has a methyl group. So even if cytosine gets spontaneously deaminated into uracil, DNA can recognize it as a foreign base, because uracil is not a component of DNA, so that can be rectified or that can be removed and it can be replaced by a correct cytosine. But in RNA, if that happens, the uracil, which has been mutated from cytosine, and still is a normal base in RNA, so that cannot be detected. Okay, and that will lead to a change in genetic information, which is not visible. Okay, genetic information should not change so rapidly, so spontaneously. So that will damage the genetic information. For that, hello, yes,
Ma'am, are you changing the slide right now? Or is it the same slide since the start?
it is the same slide.
It's the same slide, no?
Yeah, because I'm explaining first the RNA world hypothesis, where this entire, the rest of the unit is going. Okay, I'm explaining that first.
Okay, sure.
So I'm explaining you the reason why RNA world, what evidences RNA world hypothesis has. Okay. So I'm explaining here the relation between RNA and DNA. Why RNA is considered as a precursor to DNA. So first reason was that RNA nucleotides get converted into DNA nucleotides by reduction. So that enzyme is ribonucleotide reductase. And second is that thymine gets replaced, this uracil gets replaced by thymine in DNA. So there is also a reason why that happens. So DNA is made more stable as compared to RNA. Okay, and that DNA, because it was so much more suitable as a genetic material, it has been allotted the function of genetic material. And this was the first part. So let's imagine in this particular slide that RNA as a center. So from RNA, one function of RNA, that is genetic material, has been transferred to DNA because it has come out to be the more suitable candidate. Then second is the protein. Okay, and I told you that RNA can act as a protein. Okay, so later in the studies, scientists have realized that RNA can also act as protein. That means it also catalyzes biochemical reactions. Okay, and that major discovery is ribozyme. Okay, so this is our first topic of this second part of this unit, that is ribozyme. So as the name suggests, ribozyme. Ribo means ribonucleic acid, RNA, and zyme comes from enzyme. So these are simply RNA enzymes. Okay, now this was a major discovery, major evidence in support of RNA world hypothesis. Okay, that RNA can act as enzyme. So ribozymes are ribonucleic acid enzymes which catalyze specific biochemical reaction. This is a definition. These ribozymes are also called as catalytic enzymes. Okay, catalytic RNAs. Now, see the second point. They participate in variety of RNA processing reactions, including RNA splicing and protein synthesis. Okay. Now, in this topic, we will discuss 4 examples. Okay, here these are 4 examples which are the known ribozymes. Group 1 cell splicing introns, group 2 cell splicing introns, 23S rRNA and RNase-P. Now, I have selected these 4 examples because you already heard of these examples. Actually 3, group 1, group 2 and RNase-P have already done, and 23S RNA you have heard of this 23S ribosomal RNA, which is a component of large subunit of prokaryotic ribosomes. So that's why I've selected these 4. There are other known ribozymes also, but they are in the different context. So let's just focus for the time being on these 4. Okay. And yes, these ribozyme, look at the third point. In 1989, this Thomas Keck and Sidney Altman shared a Nobel Prize in chemistry for the discovery of catalytic properties of RNA. The original discovery of ribozymes, that means the ribozymes were discovered in cell splicing introns and protein-assisted RNA enzyme ribonuclease P. That is at RNase-P. So earlier ribozymes, the first discovered ribozymes were these self-splicing introns and RNase-P enzyme. Now, these four, group 1 self-splicing intron, group 2 23S rRNA and RNase-P. Remember these four. We will discuss these four one by one and explain the concept of ribozyme. That means how these RNAs can act as a catalyst. So below is just to show you the structure of this. This is the group 1 intron and the right side is 23S ribosomal RNA. Now in this structure you can see that I told you that RNA is a single stranded structure. When RNA is synthesized, it is single stranded, but it can fold upon itself wherever there is complementary base pairing possible, and it forms a two-dimensional stem loop structure. So likewise here you can see that stem loop structure both in group 1 introns and 23S rRNA. And if you Google the introns or the RNA structures, you will most likely to see these stem loop structures. So these are two-dimensional structures which are most common in RNAs. Now, these are 4 ribozymes, and here in this table is explained the number identified, number of these particular type of ribozyme, biological source, and the reaction catalyzed by them. What is the ultimate product? So let's see the first. Group 1 introns, approximately more than 1,000 number of these have been discovered. Biological sources, eukaryotes, both nucleus as well as mitochondria. Okay. In prokaryotes also some of the group 1 introns have been discovered, and bacteriophages, viruses. And reaction catalyzes self-splicing transesterification. I hope you remember. We'll discuss this again. And what is the product? 3' OH. It will ultimately generate 3' OH. Group 2, around more than 700 numbers been identified. In eukaryotes, organelles. That means they have been must be found in organelles, not in nucleus. And then prokaryotes also, the reaction is same and the product is also same. Self-splicing transesterification and the 3' OH will be generated. Then RNase-P, RNA. Now here RNase-P, RNA is written because we are interested only in the RNA part. See, in RNase-P, some RNase-P has RNA and protein content, some has only RNA content. So they have shown evolution from 2 components to a single component. So here we are talking about the RNA component of this RNase-P. But the reaction, the ability to catalyze the reaction is with RNA, though the protein is present. Okay, so that's why it is a ribozyme. More than 300 have been identified in eukaryotes, both nucleus as well as organelles, and in prokaryotes. And the reaction is hydrolysis. But the mechanism is a little bit different, but the product is same. 3' OH will be generated. And the last is ribosomal RNase. Here, typically, we are talking about 23S rRNA. That is the large subunit RNA of prokaryotes. More than 5,000 has been identified. Biological sources, eukaryotes and prokaryotes. Here, they have written eukaryotes and prokaryotes because similar activities proposed in 28S rRNA also, which is a component of large subunit of eukaryotic ribosome. Okay, but if you see the literature, more literature you will encounter with the prokaryotes. Then the reaction catalyzed is peptidyl transferase, peptidyl transfer, and earlier people used to think that this activity is with the peptidyl transferase enzyme, okay, which forms a peptide bond. Now, when the research has been carried out, you know that ribosome is made up of RNA and protein. So scientists thought that this peptidyl transferase activity must be with the proteins of large subunit. Proteins in the, that is ribosomal proteins which are there, they must be performing this peptidyl transferase activity, because earlier they used to think that the catalysis is the domain of proteins. Only proteins can catalyze biochemical reactions. But then in the experiment, they removed most of the proteins and still the activity was there. So then it has been identified that it has been observed that actually the 23S rRNA, which is there in the large subunit, actually performing this particular reaction. So there is no peptidyl transferase enzyme as such. This 23S rRNA is itself performing that reaction and acts as a ribozyme. Okay, so these are the 4 ribozymes we are going to look in this topic. See below, these are the catalytic reaction mechanisms of ribozymes. Now, question is how ribozymes catalyze a biochemical reaction. So let's see the left hand side. This is the hydrolysis or transesterification. Now here that hydrolysis is R dash group. So in different ribozymes, that R dash group will be different, which will be acting as a nucleophile. Now see the first. Okay, first see the diagram. There is R dash OH, that the red one is a nucleophile which is attacking on that phosphate of the nucleotide. So in RNase P, that R dash is H. So that means if I put H in place of that R dash, it becomes HOH, means water. Okay, so in RNase P, water is acting as a nucleophile. That oxygen in the water is acting as a nucleophile. That oxygen is attacking on that phosphate, and then the hydrolysis reaction will take place. R dash is guanosine for group 1 introns. Okay, now group 1, group 2 introns you already know that in group 1 introns, guanosine is the external nucleoside, acts as a nucleophile here. So this R dash is a guanosine in group 1 introns, internal adenosine for group 2 introns. Okay, this was the difference in group 1 and group 2. That nucleophile in group 1 comes from outside, and in group 2, the internal nucleotide acts as a nucleophile. Okay, so the mechanism is same, only that type of nucleophile is different. And look at the second, the right hand side part. Here the example is peptidyl transfer. Okay, and this peptidyl transfer mechanism is the only exception. That means rest all the non-ribozymes are shown to use either transesterification or hydrolysis to carry out the phosphoryl transfer reactions. Only this peptidyl transfer is an exception till now. So here this nucleophile is NH2 group of another amino acid. Now just remember for the time being that here the reaction is different and the nucleophile is NH2 of other amino acid. Now if you can imagine the structure of amino acid, it has R group, it has H, it has amide group, and the carboxyl group. The NH2, COOH, R, and H. Okay, so that NH2 from an amino acid acts as a nucleophile, because you know that nitrogen has also a lone pair of electrons. So here it is acting as a nucleophile. We will see this mechanism in detail when we do the peptidyl transferase activity. Okay. Now, let's first see the group 1 and group 2 intron. This is the same slide. Okay. So here, but now that time I didn't tell you that these group 1, group 2 cell splicing introns are ribozymes only. Okay, because here if you see, the reaction is getting carried out. Reaction is happening. That intron is getting cut and then they are getting joined, but no protein is in the picture. Okay, that means that intron is self-acting. It is acting on itself and it cuts itself and joins the exon. Okay, that's why the cell splicing introns are example of ribozyme. Because other cutting and joining reactions we have done in replication also. So for cutting there are nucleases enzymes, for joining there are ligase enzymes. So all these are reactions catalyzed by proteins, the enzymes, which are proteins. But here there is no such protein is acting, so they are ribozymes. See the first group 1 introns. So here this guanosine is the nucleophile. And this is not part of intron, it is the external nucleophile. Okay, so this 3' OH of the guanosine acts as a nucleophile which attacks on the adenine of this intron. And trans-esterification reaction, it breaks this phosphodiester bond between this U of exon and A of intron, so that this OH gets added, and OH gets added to the exon, and it will generate the 3' OH end, and this guanine will get added to this adenine. Okay, so the bond, phosphodiester bond between U and A will break, and the phosphodiester bond between G and A will form. That's why no external energy is required. Okay, new bond is getting formed at the expense of the old, right? So in the first step, the one end of the intron is released. Now this 3' OH acts as a nucleophile and attacks on the other end of the intron, so that same reaction takes place. The bond between G and U will break, and sometimes these two bonds can form, or otherwise the intron will be released, and when the intron is released, it will be degraded further. And when this bond breaks, this U and U will be joined. Okay, because this OH will go with G as the bond breaks. So what remains? This U of this intron, this exon, and this U of this exon. These two exons will be joined by new phosphodiester bond, and this intron will be degraded. Okay. In group 2 introns, the difference is of the nucleophile. Here the nucleophile is in the intron itself. So this adenine from this intron, the 2' OH of this adenine will act as a nucleophile. Why 2'? Why not 3'? Because 3' is not free. 3' is already bonded with the adjacent nucleotides in the phosphodiester bond. So only 2' is free. So 2' OH will act as a nucleophile, and it will attack on this end. Same, the bond between U and G break, and they will form. They will generate a 3' OH, and this G will form bond with A. Likewise. Okay. So here is the product. 3' OH end has been generated. It will attack on the other end, and this bond will break between A and U. This is actually not actually A. The in between nucleotides have not shown. So whatever the nucleotide is there, the bond will break between this intron and exon, and the bond will form between this U and this U, and they will join to form a continuous mRNA. And these here, they have formed this bond so that they can circularize. Here the intron, the released intron has been circularized. So this way, here this adenine is forming 3 phosphodiester bonds. Okay. This was the mechanism of group 1 intron and group 2 introns. Both are self-splicing introns, both are ribozymes, both are performing trans-esterification reaction and generating 3' OH end. Only the difference is in group 1, nucleophile is the external nucleoside, and in group 2, nucleophile is the nucleoside which is in the intron itself. Okay. Next is the 23S rRNA peptidyl transferase activity. But before that, let's just I'll just give you the translation process overview. That peptidyl transferase activity is a part of elongation process in translation. This will do in the next unit in detail. So this is a diagram. I just want to show you this, the position of transfer RNAs. Okay, how that peptidyl transferase reaction takes place. But before that, you need to understand the position. So look at this diagram. This is the mRNA. Now has been linked with this small subunit. This is a large subunit, and now this has been ready for elongation because initiation already taken place. So we are directly in the elongation step. So here in this diagram, in the last subunit of ribosome, there are 3 sites. Okay, remember there are three sites: E site, P site, and A site. Okay, so in this diagram, this is the E site. E site refers to exit site. This is the P site, the middle one. P site means peptidyl site. And this is A site. A site means amino acyl site or amino acyl site. It is because the peptidyl group, the chain will be present here. New amino acid transfer RNA will bind here. So that's why there are three sites, E, P, and A. So how elongation takes place during translation? So this is, and this is in the bacteria, okay? This is in the bacteria. This is the P site. First step is this transfer RNA will bring this formilated methionine. Okay, methionine, AUG, codes for the first amino acid, that is methionine. So this transfer RNA will bring this F-met and will get bind to the P site. Only first transfer RNA, only the transfer RNA which brings the first amino acid can bind to P site. Rest all other transfer RNAs bringing amino acid will bind to A site. Only the first transfer RNA is an exception. Okay. So this is the first transfer RNA which has brought this F-met. Now this is the second transfer RNA which has brought serine. Now what will happen? When they have taken their place, they are oriented correctly, the peptide bond will be formed between these two. Okay. So what will happen? The F-met, this amino acid has been bound to this transfer RNA. So this bond will break and this F-met will form a peptide bond with this serine. Look at the next diagram. Okay, this F-met has been removed from here, from this transfer RNA has been bonded with this serine. Okay, so peptide bond has been formed between this F-met and serine. And peptide bond is, how peptide bond is formed? Peptide bond is CONH. Okay, amino acid has NH2 and COOH. So imagine one amino acid has NH2 and COOH, another amino acid also has NH2 and COOH. And peptide bond is formed by loss of water molecule. So NH2 will lose its hydrogen, COOH will lose its OH, and CONH bond will form. So here that reaction has been taken place and now you can see the bond between these two amino acids. Next, what will happen? This ribosome shifts one codon, shifts by one codon, so that now you can see here this empty transfer RNA. Empty means there is no amino acid. So now this empty transfer RNA. This empty transfer RNA is at the exit site. This transfer RNA with two amino acids now at the P site, and this A site is empty. Okay. Now this A site will be occupied by the next transfer RNA bringing next amino acid, and this cycle will get repeated. This E site, this is the exit site. So see here, this transfer RNA without any amino acid will be released, and the new transfer RNA will come. Again, the same reaction will take place. The bond between the serine and transfer RNA will break, and these two amino acids will be shifted to this transfer RNA with the next amino acid, and now that transfer RNA will have three amino acids. Okay, likewise, the ribosome will get shifted towards the 3' end of the mRNA, one codon each at each step, and the entire mRNA will be translated. So this is their peptidyl transferase activity. So you have to remember this P site, A site, how transfer RNA are aligned, and how that reaction takes place. This part is important to understand the peptidyl transferase activity. Okay, don't bother about the details. We will do it in the next unit. So here is the peptidyl transferase activity. Now look at this diagram. This is the pictorial representation, three-dimensional structure of large subunit of ribosome. It's a bacterial ribosome. You can see this 23S rRNA and 5S. Now you can see there are the structure is quite complicated, and all the you can see this helical structure. That means these are proteins, and you can see this strands and the bases. So that means this is RNA. So RNA plus protein forms the large subunit of prokaryotic ribosome. So in this blue ones, all the blue ones are proteins. All the brown ones are 23S rRNA, So all this brown strand you can see is 23S rRNA. This olive, you can see this olive color strand, this is 5S rRNA because large subunit is made up of 2 types of ribosomal RNA, right? So this olive is 5S rRNA and this red is the transitional analog. So this center must be the site of peptide transferase activity. And here you can see there is no blue color as such as seen. That means there are no proteins nearby at this active site. So you can see all the brown strands. So the peptide transferase activity is with the 23S ribosomal RNA, though the proteins are present. Okay. Now, here is the reaction. Now you can see here, this is P site and A site. Now you can understand what is P site and what is A site. So this is peptidyl site and this is the transfer RNA present at the peptidyl site. And this is transfer RNA present at the amino acid site. Okay. And see, this is a transfer RNA. So here you can see this is a nitrogen base. So remember that transfer RNA has amino acid binding arm which has CCA sequence. That CCA sequence is universal in all transfer RNAs and that arm brings amino acid. So that means this is that CCA sequence, that this is actually the adenine base. So that A, adenine nucleotide, is the arm of the transfer RNA which is bringing this amino acid. Okay, so this is amino acid. Because peptidyl transfer RNA will have many amino acids. So that's why they have shown this peptidyl. And this A is the new transfer RNA. So it has this only one amino acid. And now I've told you that NH2 from the another amino acid will act as a nucleophile in peptidyl transferase reaction. This is only the exception. Otherwise, all the other ribozymes, they use either transesterification or hydrolysis. But this peptidyl transferase, this reaction uses this NH2 from this amino acid, which is present at the amino acid site. So this NH2 attacks on this particular bond between this transfer RNA and amino acid, and it will break. And what will happen? This OH will H will be transferred here. So this will have H, and this bond will form between this blue amino acid and this red amino acid. So this blue is actually the chain. So here you can see the bond has been formed. This is CONH. You can see this is the peptide bond, CONH. Okay, this H has been lost from here, and OH, that H has been gained by this O. So it has become OH, and OH has another OH must be lost. So water molecule has been lost, and this CONH bond has been formed. Okay, there is complex reaction taking place in between. This is a simplified version. In this diagram, you can see how that transfer of charge take place, transfer of how bonds gets transferred. Okay, how that protons transfer take place. This is the same diagram. This is that NH2. Okay, and it is acting on this bond. So this is the transfer RNA at the P site, and this is the peptidyl site, peptidyl chain. So here you can see this blue is the transfer RNA at the peptidyl site. A is the part of transfer RNA's amino acid site, and this green, pale green residues you can see, these are the ribosomal residues. Okay, so you can see this dotted lines are the hydrogen bonds. These are the weak interactions. So these weak interactions are important for this transfer. Okay, because when the nucleophile attacks and the bonds change, the bond breaks, and when the proton gets released, then there has to be an acceptor to which that proton will be accepted, so that the intermediate state, the intermediates can be formed, and then the new bonds can form. So for this, these interactions are important. So these ribosome residues plays an important role in stabilizing the transition state. They provide these weak interactions so that these two can come close to each other. This transfer RNA at the P side and transfer RNA at the A side. They provide that active site so that they can come close to each other, and when the reaction is taking place, they stabilize the intermediate products, intermediates of the reaction, and then the product will be produced. Okay. So this is the internal chemistry which is taking place in peptidyl transferase activity. Next is the RNase-P activity. Now, if you remember, this is the diagram. If you remember this diagram is the same diagram from transfer RNA processing. Okay, here I've just shown only one step because here is that RNase-P enzyme. I told you that all these examples you already done. You know what RNase-P does? RNase-P, this cuts the 5' leader sequence during the transfer RNA processing. This is the primary transcript of transfer RNA. Then 5' leader sequence and 3' trailer sequence has been cut. It gets modified, the introns have been removed, and then it forms the mature transfer RNA, right? So this is the first step in which this 5' splice that has been cut, and this cutting reaction is carried out by this RNase-P. Now we know that RNase-P is actually a ribozyme. This is how this RNase-P carries out this reaction. This is the leader 5. So this is a leader sequence. So we are here. We are interested in breaking this bond, okay, between the last nucleotide of 5' leader sequence, and then this is the sequence of transfer RNA. So this is these two nucleotides, and the bond has to be broken between these two. So this is the 5' leader, and this is the 3' end of the transfer RNA, because when the bond has been broken, what will generate? It will generate 3' OH. Okay. So this OH acts as a nucleophile and it attacks so that the bond will break, and the proton will get transferred to this OH. So now this 5' end has been generated, and this is the this is the 3' end, and this is the 5'. This is 5' OH. Okay. This is the 5' OH. This is 3'. 5' phosphate, and this is 3' OH. Okay. Now here on this arrow you can see RNase-P requires this Mg+2. Now when you talk about the catalysis, catalytic activities, divalent cations are they play an important role, and in ribozymes especially, like proteins also use this divalent cations. If you see the mechanisms of polymerase enzymes, DNA polymerase, RNA polymerase, nucleases, all these are protein enzymes. They also use divalent cations at the active site so that they can form coordinate compounds. Okay. Here also RNA, because this Mg+2 has a high affinity to the negatively charged phosphate. Okay. First, there should be interaction between the substrate and the nucleophile, substrate and the enzyme. So here RNase-P, that RNA is acting as an enzyme. So first there has to be some interaction. So for that, this Mg+2 helps because of the affinity between the charges. It has high affinity for the phosphate group, as nucleotide, these nucleic acids are highly negatively charged because each nucleotide has a negative charge because of the phosphate. So it interacts with that phosphate, and it helps in the catalysis. So this is one point why RNAs can act as how they can act as a catalyst. Now, if you compare these RNA enzymes, ribozymes with the protein enzymes, then why they can act as catalyst. First is they can lower the activation energy, which is like protein enzymes. Okay, how enzymes increase the rate of reaction, they lower the activation energy. So ribozymes are also known to lower the activation energy substantially. Ribozymes can also use cofactors like protein enzymes. Okay. Then these ribozymes, RNA, can fold into 3D shapes. That means 3D structures can be produced. Now, this stem and loop are the two-dimensional structures. RNA can also go further and form complex three-dimensional structures, because see, when a compound has to act as a molecule has to act as an enzyme, it has to produce a catalytic site, and the site can be produced only when the three-dimensional structure is produced. Okay, two-dimensional structure means a flat structure like a paper, which cannot produce any active site. So when the three-dimensional structure is produced, when there is a volume, then the active site can be produced, and that active site can accommodate a substrate, and interaction can take place, and then the product will be produced. So RNA has known to produce complex three-dimensional structures also. These are the properties which require for a molecule to act as a catalyst, to act as an enzyme. Okay. Then yes, here I would have told you that divalent cations, the use of divalent cations is that they are used in a similar mechanism like protein enzymes. So these are some properties of ribozymes which make them a good catalyst. So here we have seen that ribozymes can act as catalysts. They can catalyze biochemical reactions. So this is a strong evidence that before proteins evolved, RNA must be catalyzing the biochemical reaction. Yes, there are some controversies also that makes some doubts on raise some doubt on this hypothesis, but these examples tells you that RNA has a capacity to catalyze biochemical reactions. Because proteins have 20 amino acids, they can form more diverse reactions and more suitable for catalysis. So RNA has the function of catalysis must have been transferred from RNA to proteins when they evolved. Okay, you can see the mechanisms how proteins catalyze a reaction. They are more diverse. The one basic reason is RNA is made up of only 4 nucleotides and proteins are made up of 20 amino acids. So naturally, there are more opportunities to interact with the substrate and form product. They can form more catalyzing reactions or more efficiently. So this was a part which this discovery of ribozymes important in explaining RNA world hypothesis. All right. So here I've explained you 4 known ribozymes, and we have seen a bit about their activity. See, these are latest discovery. The ribozyme is quite a latest discovery. So still there is research going on to find out if there are other ribozymes also, if there are other ribozymes present, how they act, if there is different mechanism possible. So here are the references which I've used for ribozyme. The group 1 and group 2 ribozymes, the diagram were from Leninger. Even even the genetics, Russell has the group 1 intron mechanism explained in the book. The rest of the part, the information is not in the reference book. That is, I'm talking about Russell and Leninger, because see the publication of the papers. This is 2002. This is Leninger. This is 2007. So this is 2011. So you can see how recent these results, these discoveries are. This research is quite recent. So you have to refer literature, that is research papers. Okay. I'll put some of these research papers I've referred for your reference. Then you can do your own referencing also for the ribozyme. Any questions?
No, ma'am.
Okay. So Fine. We can move to the next topic. We have few minutes. Next topic is ribo switches. Now, I will not start with the core topic today, but I will give you some examples which have already, or some mechanisms we already done. We have already done in the previous units. Remember this diagram, termination of transcription. This is a last step of transcription in prokaryotes. So this termination of transcription mechanism, we have done two, row dependent and row independent. So here I'm interested in this row independent terminators. I've told you that we'll encounter this again later in this unit. So here we are. So these row independent terminators, remember I told you that these have this two-fold symmetry. Okay. And because of this two-fold symmetry, when the DNA gets transcribed into an RNA, they can form this hairpin loop structure, this stem and the loop. So this structure looks like a hairpin. So here you can see this RNA is forming the secondary structure. This is important. That formation of secondary structure is terminating the transcription without help of any protein. Okay, because see the other mechanism, row protein, that is row dependent terminators, they require this row protein because this row protein has helicase activity so that it can unwind RNA DNA hybrid and the RNA will be released. Okay, so row independent terminators are different because this RNA itself can form a secondary structure and can terminate its own transcription. Okay, because see there is no protein involved in this process. Only the secondary structure is forming because of this complementary base pairing, because of this two-fold symmetry, and this U sequence. This U sequence is also important. After forming this hairpin loop, this U sequence is important. So because of this sequence and forming this hairpin loop structure, it is able to terminate its own transcription. Okay, so this point is important. That RNA can form secondary structures and it can responsible for some effect. Okay, it can have some individual function. Here its function is termination of transcription. Okay. So the point is, if RNA is really the ancestor of this DNA and protein, that RNA world did really exist when RNA was a sole molecule performing both the functions as genetic material as well as catalysis. That means it has to perform this reaction itself, right? Without any help, it has to perform this reaction itself. So these evidences give an important evidence for RNA world hypothesis. And if you see the central dogma, even DNA replication requires RNA primers. Okay, DNA polymerase cannot initiate reaction, but RNA polymerase can initiate RNA synthesis. Okay, so in replication, there is evidence that RNA primers are required for DNA replication. So DNA, if it has to get replicated, form its own copy, it requires RNA primers. Then in transcription, RNA polymerase can initiate its own synthesis. It doesn't require any primer. Then if you see translation, in translation, if you see the bigger picture, mRNA has the information. Now you know that ribosomal RNA, 23S ribosomal RNA is performing the peptidyl transferase activity, and that amino acid is brought about by transfer RNA. So how the protein is forming? The first peptide bond in the protein is formed by RNA. So that means the formation of polypeptide is because of activity of RNA. And if you see the entire picture, all the RNAs are participating to form protein. mRNA has a coding information, transfer RNA is bringing the amino acid, and ribosomal RNA is making the peptide bond, right? So all the activities are performed by RNA. So these are the evidences which supports RNA world hypothesis. But And because the fact remains that we cannot really go back in time and see what actually has happened, this remains still as a hypothesis. But yes, we are curious about how evolution has taken place, how all these complex molecules have this today, they have these function and have their activities. So the research is still going on to find out the evolution of RNA, DNA, and proteins. Okay. With this, we'll stop here. Next time, we'll do in detail riboswitches. Okay.
Ma'am, should I stop recording?
Yeah, you can. Oh, yes. I'll stop sharing. Okay. Thank you.